when it comes down to things, as we go to the political phase for this, nobody had enough money to go to war, basically. The Germans could, but the idea of trying, oh, first of all, they're not through Yugoslavia yet. There are some militia that are going to be there. So we won't be at full effectiveness when we hit. And the idea of running through Romania, declaring war in order to do that, just really didn't sound appealing with only this one little gap to move through. And with Bulgaria coming into the war, Sweden being iffy, etc. So what we did was, today, this was the turn for alliances. Germany and Italy, and Britain and the US, both signed alliances. I still have to do the US entry actions, which involves, you know, calculating things out to see where we are. Although we're probably high enough that it doesn't really, you know, that most actions can be taken. I'm not sure where Britain and the US are heading. They're kind of considering themselves most interested in a war with Japan, finish Japan off, let Germany handle Russia, and see what happens, you know, after that. So Russia couldn't intervene in Yugoslavia. They didn't have the cash for it, which means Yugoslavia is going to fall. They're going to lose in political effectiveness. Germany's looking at, yeah, I'd like the opening through Hungary as well, the possibility of Turkey. The deal actually allowed Italy to do a little bit of jiu-jitsu on here to get Sweden into Germany's camp, just using the manipulation well. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of miners coming in against the Russians. The problem is, there's not going to be a war in 40. We're going to be going into 41 before we hit the Russians. And the Russians start getting a hell of a force pool in 41. And an army that sits there right now, I mean, they have planes and a few other things on the way, but an army that sits there right now that's mostly composed of infantry and would pretty much be easy to brush aside in the clear terrain of Russia. Maybe not so much in Romania. There's some nice mountains there, alpine hex sides and such. But in the clear terrain of Russia, that army would be pretty easy to push aside, you know, with an open front and everything. But that's not going to be the case. And, you know, it's hard to tell, because what it looks like right now is that Britain's not going to go to war with Germany. That they're going to concentrate on the US. And that means Germany has essentially a free hand against Russia, which might work. Moving forward without having taken Poland, without all that, that really is turning out to have been a huge mistake, I think. But it's not the only mistake the Axis is making. The Japanese are just so screwed over here because of their commitment to China. Yeah, you know, they get some tactical advances, but they've got so much of their resources tied up in there. It's not like they haven't been building navies, but then again, I also have to worry about these damn convoys, which maybe aren't that out of sync right now. It's hard to tell because, you know, everything from Britain except Australia can be handled, you know, over land if I get a big enough convoy somewhere, you know, in Europe, because everything's neutral right now. But once the war starts, I'm not going to be at all prepared for it. More troubling, the Japanese pulling resources from Italy. And I keep reading these poorly, but the number here is the number of the... I read this, which is the range on these suckers. Which actually is a problem, isn't it? I can't haul this shit from Mexico anyway, because I don't have a base, do I? 1, 2, 3. I do not have a base that I can support those guys in. Oops. Yeah. So I don't know why I have those Mexican resources and why I worried about them so much. I shouldn't be pulling them in, but Japan needs all the help they can get. So We'll try to rationalize where the convoys are before things break out, because that's when they really make sense. They really make sense in terms of a limiting factor when enemy actions could risk those convoy lines and cut them apart. So, you know, it might be possible that I have this line that I can actually draw running it up through up here. I doubt it. It's 3. I mean, Mexico's... the point is that I can be tracing goods from Mexico up to Alaska and pull them in. Who knows? You know? So it's really hard to tell whether or not there was a viable convoy line that could work there. But in the long run, this oil from Mexico is not going to make it into Japan. Probably this turn I'll stop hauling it unless, you know, unless I can seize something. I don't think there's anything I can take without going to war. Because this is Japanese, but starting here we're looking at a Commonwealth island and U.S. islands. We're really not going to see, you know, we're not going to see those convoys being able to be based that far away. Does it make sense? Not terribly. When it comes down to it, maybe during military actions it makes sense, but without the military actions, requiring the convoys to actually be able to base out of a home base seems pretty unlikely. But, well, I think there's a significant amount of tension up there now, so maybe, you know, with the oil embargo, etc., there may be a restriction that would make sense to prevent the Japanese ships from docking in the U.S. or in Commonwealth ports on the way in. Alrighty, because they're not really military shipping before there's a war, right? But I could see the U.S. preventing, being able to force Mexico, just like they would the Dutch East Indies, to prevent that shipment from going through. If it is legitimate to do it through Alaska, and it actually looks like it would be. 1, 2, 3. I'm still not going to make it because I don't have a port up here. Yeah, so I don't know. Anyway, there you have it. I'm cheating in another way. But yeah, the game has a hard time starting when I play with the Days of Decision. Even with the old Days of Decision, I found that the war tended not to start on time. Maybe things seemed to happen, you know, it seemed like it was on track for a while. Maybe some things even happened early. Like I think I took Czechoslovakia early in this one. But actually getting to the pull the trigger and start sending troops in, that's just so damn hard because you don't have all your ducks lined up in a row the way you want them. And you think, well, next year things will be better. And still struggling in China. You can see some flipped units. The communists managed a pretty hefty counterattack after the Chinese kind of cleared up some of the issues that were going on over there. And, well, or after the Japanese cleared up some of the issues that were going on with the Chinese. The biggest problem is now the nationalists have a fairly powerful fighter plane. And that means I'm at risk of losing a bomber. I don't have a fighter over there yet. Actually, I have one here. I don't have a good fighter over there yet. You know, any attack that I make, I have to coordinate with the fighter in that case. I'm able to attack the communists, though. nationalists don't coordinate with them. And look, Vinegar Joe's there too. So I'm kind of focusing more in the north, trying to break the communist side of things and not losing a bomber every turn because they have enough fighters. Over here, things are pretty much cleared up in Yugoslavia. It's fallen. And now Germany has sort of one last chance to make their decision. Do they want to go in against the Ruskies or not? Right now, they have a great deal more force than the Russians do. They'd get the surprise turn. They're going to get that no matter what. It's not that big a deal right now because of the fighters in place. I had been thinking, yeah, I want to wait until I can bring Italy in. But now I'm having kind of second thoughts, or third or fourth. Because here's the thing. If I wait until 41 to go into Russia, that gives the Russians more time to build up. They'll have a real army. Right now they do not. On the other hand, this is awfully late in the year. We're looking at August or whatever, right? I've already done part of the July-August turn. I'm further from the Russian border than I would be normally. But I might be able to get the Romanian oil back, and that really hurts not to have that. And I might be able to get quite a bit of distance in. I'm not going to be able to bring any countries in because I haven't declared that. I wouldn't be able to bring them in next turn either because I'd have to pay for the war by getting an activation and, actually paying the war out. So I'm not going to have any allies there. I'm not going to have the Italian allies that I'm really looking forward to. But I think I can hammer the shit out of the Russians in Romania because my main force is down there. And I think I can make some ground here. Is this what I want to do? Jeez. It's really tough. The Russians don't have a whole hell of a lot programmed to come in. I don't see much at all. I see another fighter. Couple more fighters. I don't see any infantry here for this turn. So they're not going to have any forces there. Over here they've got one more infantry. They're not even really building up for it. Now, on the other hand, if I wait them out, I can attack in early 41, make the same kind of move in. The big difference is if I attack now, I boost Russian production up another space, and Russia can take that production. If I wait until 41, maybe I wait until they pay to get to that level of production, rather than giving it to them for free, because I'm not going to be hitting them very hard this turn before we go into worse weather. September, October is not going to be pretty, chances are. We look at it, yeah, there's good weather there. But we're mainly in the Arctic zone, so we'll be looking at rain, maybe storms, maybe snow. Snow wouldn't be as bad as storms, but on the other hand, there might not be a hell of a lot in our way, especially up here in the north. We don't have a lot of troops we can convoy into place. I only have one convoy anyway, but I was looking, geez, could I move this guy up and maybe convoy him in and have another big unit to attack with. And that doesn't look like it's going to be the case. I just don't know. I'm tempted in both directions. Natural unwillingness to take bold action means it's not going forward. It just looked too iffy. Too many negatives. I think I'll be able to hit them with a real hammer blow between Germany and Italy both, with all the Italian allies that are aligned right now, or lined up right now. They're not actually aligned yet. But over here in China, because the communists are doing so well, the nationalists charged in and took Chengdu. And that was kind of dicky of them, no doubt. It's also opening a threat here. Basically, what the hell are they doing, Well, they can't make any headway against the Japanese any more than the Japanese can make headway against them. But they could win the Civil War. If Xi'an falls to the Japanese and they take Lanzhou and this resource hex, Communist China's done. So this becomes an existential problem for the communists. And again, they can't keep pushing against the Japanese because the nationalists are screwing them over. The nationalists feel pretty safe down where they are. They don't think the Japanese can make a close on them. But if the communists fall back, who knows? Weird, ugly situation going on there. Reminds me, you gotta take a look at the really, really cool Warlords. I did that. I covered that not too long ago. That's a fun game on this whole period in China, where you have the nationalists sometimes, or the communists sometimes cutting deals with the Japanese against the other. I only played the big 7-player scenario as opposed to the 3-player scenario. The 3-player scenario is really interesting, actually. More interesting because the communists tend not to do too well in the 7-player scenario. And the impulse, the turn, ends with communist China almost destroyed. Now, Lanzhou being captured wouldn't destroy them. They still have to lose this. However, the communists wouldn't be in supply then, and they couldn't have recovered these units. The nationalists may just make it possible for the Japanese to win the Civil War. The Western Allies are taking this really ugly route. They're taking the, hey, let's let the Germans fight the Russians. We'll ignore that. France is kind of pissed about all this. But let's let the Germans fight the Russians. We're going to fight the Japanese, but we're going to beat the Chinese communists with the feeling that, well, with the entire force pool, etc., and U.S. aid, China's going to be able to survive this sucker. And they're probably right. They're probably right. It looks like it's, you know, giving up the communists' territory would be a major risk, but it may well be worth it, because otherwise the communists end up with a big chunk of China at the end of the war. You know, just as a matter of, their forces are just more effective against the Japanese on attack. But eventually U.S. troops will be able to come in there. The only problem with all of this, well, one problem with all of this, is that the U.S. entry against Japan didn't go well. Right now they've got it down to 36, which is fine, but they've got an 8 tensions. And they still haven't moved their fleet into Pearl Harbor. It was boosting tensions and it went overboard, is basically what happened. Now, you know, when I said, well, I think it's 11 against each, I don't think that's the case. I think it's 11 total. So the U.S. is now capable of gearing up, which they'll do, assuming their numbers are good, which I think they are. But if we look at this 36 here, now, this number's not correct. I lost a few points off of it due to that move. So that's going to be 2 points left. Call it 34. That'll be down on this column. Well, the problem is 8 or 9, I have no chance of declaring war there. And, well, it's not really what I'm intending to do, but I'm afraid the tensions are going to go up even more, which makes it less likely for war to happen. I have to wait for a higher U.S. entry. I was hoping to kind of intervene early. I still have other things to do, though. I still have, you know, the Brits, the alliance with the Brits to try to seal up in better shape. And Germany and Italy have more or less drifted into the, you know, we really can't take Britain on. Yeah, we have a navy, but it's not big enough. And the U.S. will come in eventually, so let's take Russia out. Let's see what we can do with them. Now, this game is kind of interesting in that, in, you know, your normal World War II strategic game, if, say, Moscow were to fall, Russia usually doesn't surrender but they have the opportunity to do so in this game. They have the opportunity to call a Vichy surrender, give up that territory. For now, they can come back, maybe. The advantage, well, no, they really can't. Because if they do a Vichy surrender, they no longer control themselves. They become part of the Axis powers with that section. The only thing they could really hope for is if there was some other communist power to save their bacon or something. But surrendering's no good. Yeah, I was thinking maybe there's a possibility of, you know, like in what I played recently, Unconditional Surrender, of the Russians coming back, but there really isn't. So they pretty much are going to have to refuse a surrender, which means there's no way of knocking them out of the war without... it's possible. So if the Japanese strategy worked well in China, there'd be a large Japanese land army, which could then move into the Siberian areas, and at the same time, the big German army could take the European map, and you can actually see Russia fall under those circumstances. That seems really, really unlikely. China's too big a thing to bite off. I probably... you know, if I had known the game was going to devolve this way, I probably should have tried for an early attack on Russia using both Japan and Germany at the same time. But that would involve Germany going through Poland, la la la, and I didn't want to do that. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's conceivable that Germans can make their way onto the Asian map. This is real hard to move through, though. It looks like this wide open area that you can just grab, but the truth of the matter is, nah, it ain't that easy. All right, well, on to production, I guess. November, December ends up being, September, October ends up being a crap stout turn, with Italy getting the only action off, although Germany and the US paid for them. Italy tried to do an alliance with Germany, increase, you know, the relationship between the two. Once we get it up to level 3, boom, we can go in together and fully cooperate. Right now it's at level 1. Level 2 is kind of helpful. Level 1, not too much. They triggered Argentina and pulled that into their own sphere, for what little it matters. But, you know, Chile's in the Japanese sphere, Argentina's in the Italian sphere. We could end up seeing a war break out in South America. The way things stand, Mexico is in the Japanese sphere. So there's some interesting circumstances in play there, there's no question. And I guess we move on to the turn, and really nothing's going to happen unless the weather clears, I guess. We got rain up in the North Temperate Zone up here, and it's hard enough to fight in China. But depending on who gets, well, we got reinforcements to place first, so I think there are some communists on the track. Uh-oh. Wow. I don't see any, and that could really, that could screw the communists completely. Basically, if the nationalists grab these, communist China falls. Now that opens up some opportunities for Japan, but wow, that's especially bad because the Russians ended up spending almost all their points trying to build things that caused Chinese to happen. Well, the things they built ended up being communist Chinese, which simply will disappear if it's destroyed. Now, the units will go back in the countermix and be available to the nationalist Chinese, but it looks like communist China is likely to fall. All I have to do is slide here, and then one more hex up into this resource center before the communists can do something about it. So we may see some action down there. We may see the communists falling on the nationalists, trying to save their own territory, and that'll open up some opportunities for the Japanese, no matter how you cut it. Only real interesting action happened in China. Communist China is no more. There really wasn't much that could be done about it. They were flung out too far ahead of their positions. Now the nationalists have taken over, and they've taken back most of the line that used to be. Granted, the communists had pushed the Japanese back, but now we've got a fair defensive line. Most of the territory that the two together held, Xi'an had been held by the communists for a bit, but they had gotten pushed back out of that before this turn. And now we don't have to worry about splitting the points for China as the nationalists. So, you know, it's a little bit riskier, but it still looks pretty solid to me. If the weather had held a little better, if the Japanese had gotten some better bombing die rolls, yeah, they'd be in there. But they're really, you know, it's a tough slog through that crap. And now with winter coming, and most of it in the northern temperate region, it's not going to be pretty no matter what. You know, the best you can kind of hope for is snow, which isn't terribly good. Yeah, no, rain maybe is the best with land attacks at -1. It's so hard to tell because they're both crappy. Yeah, rain and snow are about equally bad. So snow's a little worse, I guess, unless you have you know, ski troops or Russians. White print Russians are good in the snow. November, December, and the Germans wanted to ally with Italy, but Italy looked too far down, so instead they did their gear up. Now this is an iffy gear up because they don't even quite match the production that they're supposed to have. But I've got some new oil coming online. I don't have to make all my production. I can keep taking oil. It adds about 4 points a turn, so you know, even if I don't take all that production, if I save 2 oil each turn, which seems sufficient right now. So we did that, and we triggered, gosh, none of this. I don't remember what we triggered. I think we triggered Bulgaria and managed to pull it just a little off the Soviets, which is kind of cool, because we had some pluses for Bulgaria. Then the US went, they got their election off. They would have liked to have geared. They wanted to do it earlier, but, well, this is where they went. Next turn they have to try to gear. But they triggered Spain and managed to get it up into here, even with some Soviet influence and some negatives for some Allied influence. By gaming the system properly, they were able to get it that far using anti-fascist factors that were in play. So they view that as kind of important because in the long run it might be that Spain enters the war as a communist power, and then that would be problematic for the Allies. All right, well, on to allocating all of these suckers, and you know what? I forgot to roll the weather. Let's take a look. Probably forgot to do partisans too last turn, but they've been pretty crappy. Okay, weather's not good. I was misreading the weather chart. We're over here in November, December. That's pretty good. Yeah, two impulses for every one. But and we got the forces on the board. Germany really gathering up in East Prussia. Yeah, that's going to be a major focus of their attack. Maybe they should really take the Polish corridor. But they still have these fantasies of Poland coming in. And I don't know. You know, they've got the Navy that Russia does not. Russia didn't bother building their Baltic Sea Fleet at all. So the Germans are just going to be able to dominate over there. Especially if Sweden joins in, they have a navy as well. Not a huge one, but that gives them, I think, some additional transport capabilities at least. So they should be able to keep things in supply and ship forces there if need be or whatever. Now, Nobody really cared too much about initiative, so they went in reverse order up here. An attempt to, get more modifiers, because if you get less turns than the other player, you get a bonus. I don't know how big a bonus that really is. Commonwealth can go up to +2. There is no -2 space here. All right. Actually had fairly good weather throughout November, December. If there had been an attack going on into Russia, it wouldn't have been too unpleasant. A little bit of rain, but some fair weather, and not ever in the Arctic itself. But what that worked out to mean is that there was room for a Chinese offensive of some sort. Oops, forgot to roll. I rolled for the turn increase, and the Japanese got one. They're getting up to where they can get 2 a turn pretty soon. They don't get one. They captured Lanchow here, and now the nationalists are being cut down to about what they were before they defeated the communists in terms of area controlled, but they're in pretty solid position with these fighter planes that they've got in place. It didn't help here. They managed to not get bombed successfully during the one clear weather turn, but Lanchow fell, and that means this is going to fall too. And Japan is, making some advances that they hadn't made before. This is not a red factory, is it? No. It's just a victory point space. Another big event, the U.S., they had already taken the action to okay getting into the Hawaiian Islands, but now they actually landed there, and they're going to be landing there and in Samoa. I have to pay some oil for that. U.S. isn't going to have a big problem with oil, but even with these big reserves that the Japanese have here, they've got some real problems. They've got basically a net zero cash flow of oil right now. Now, they're not in the position that they were historically where, oh yeah, we need oil now, and therefore they had to seize the Netherlands East Indies. By taking it early, I made sure that I've had good oil throughout the game. And honestly, I don't know if the Japanese could have operated without it, just on the U.S. oil. I guess, but they would have had far too few resources to hit the production that they've been hitting. As it stands though now, the U.S. production's been taken away from them, so they're kind of at a wash in terms of they don't have as much, they don't have the oil from the Netherlands East Indies, but they've gotten a good deal of resources from China, and then of course I'm slipping something in from Mexico, probably illegally. But we're building those convoys up. We'll get the numbers up at some point. So this is almost the signal. The U.S. has trouble declaring war on Japan before they get their fleet into Hawaii, and this is the move that more or less tells the Japanese, yeah, you're on a ticker right now. They might be coming at any point. For the Japanese, I actually slipped a garrison into Truk. I can't afford to lose that. I'm not going to militarize the Marshalls, though. I don't see a hell of a lot of value to that. There is, okay, let me tell you what the value is. If I'm going to launch an attack, I want to have some of my air support coming out of there. That's fine. But until that moment, I'm not too worried about it. So we'll move some of our planes into place shortly, but right now we're not too terribly worried about it. We've got we do have to start planning though for a U.S. entry. The question, of course, is, are the Commonwealth going to enter at the same time? And that right now the Commonwealth doesn't have a lot to defend themselves. So then there's the, well, can I afford, to make the brunt of the attack, as it was historically really, against Commonwealth territories, Hong Kong's not too valuable, but you want to grab it because it could be a staging point. It's a major port. It could be a staging point into China. Malaysia, obviously, with Singapore, absolutely vital. And then calling Siam in and launching the attack into Burma. But I don't have a lot of troops. That's the real problem. So we'll see what comes in 41 and how much I can build. I'm not going to finish China in that time, and I'm probably not going to even be able to withdraw much from China, if anything. All right. Well, anyway, the impulses are over, so it's time to start building. Okay, well, we're done with production. As you can see, the U.S. starts building up some ground units. Why? Well, their intention is, Mexico. You know, if Mexico gets called into the war, they're in a lot of trouble, and Mexico's sitting right over here. I'm really not prepared to go to war with Japan yet. Maybe I'm hoping Japan starts the thing by me being out in the Hawaiian Islands. It's about the right time. But well, no, we're a little early. But yeah, it always feels weird because there's no war going on here, and it feels like so much time has passed, but it really hasn't. Germany gearing up with a bunch of planes, actually, and they're also clearing out the debt they have. How important is that? It's not terribly important, but I want to make sure I can declare war when I want to, and this will give me more points for the new 41 force pool, and that's the thing. I got to pull all those 41 counters into play. Russia building up some headquarters, some mechs, not really concentrating on infantry. They don't have a hell of a lot left. They've built most of that, so we're getting some of the better units out there, and we're hoping. We're not sure, you know, do we want to gear up, or do we want to set ourselves up for, you know, letting the Germans attack us, which will automatically gear us up. I think I'm going to automatically gear the Chinese up. At this point, it feels as though they're in an all-out war. It doesn't feel like there's any real limitation. I guess that depends. As soon as Japan starts... yeah, Japan's still at limited war with them. Nah, fuck that. Until the U.S. comes in, I don't think that gear up can happen without a cost. So, yeah, that's where we are right now. We'd like to modernize the Nationalist Army. That seems like a good plan. Although I don't have a lot of white border units, but that step up, especially because the communists added some white border units to the pool. Those white border unit or white print units don't get the nationalist penalty if you modernize the Chinese army. If you don't modernize the Chinese army, the Chinese really aren't capable of any offensive actions. The nationalists have really not been able to sustain any attacks. I don't know how helpful that is, though. The Japanese have a pretty strong garrison in China. It's going to be hard to cope with. Speaking of the Japanese, they're building up a lot of land units. Not so much for China, but for that possibility of an attack on some of the other powers. They're really kind of terrified of what the U.S. is going to do, but we don't know what the points are like. In the U.S., we look at the U.S. Army and we say, well, they're not going to be able to do much. They might have a strong Navy, but the Japanese Navy is actually pretty damn powerful. I'm pretty proud of the carrier force that I've assembled. I think I've done a better job than the Western Allies have at building that up. So I don't know how much the U.S. is going to actually be able to do in the Pacific. without the Commonwealth's aid. The Commonwealth, if their whole navy kind of moves over there, or enough that Germany, you know, we need a residual force for Germany and or Italy. Italy's actually got a fair-sized navy, and they've got a bigger one in the bank over here. So there's only so much I can commit to the Pacific, even if I'm not at war. Weather's not terribly good. You know what? I think I was rolling on the January, February last turn. I've done this last year too, and it's just a weird situation, but I'll live with it. You know? So yeah, I guess the big deal is moving the force pools into play at this point. As we move into 41 activations, Russia didn't have enough money to gear up. They would have made money if they geared up early. But as it stands, it doesn't really probably make much sense to them. They'd make about $7 a turn for a gear up. So if the war starts in March, April, well, they'd get an automatic gear up then, and they'd actually lose money. If it starts over here in May, June, which is more likely perhaps due to weather and such not, and what the Italians and Germans look like they're planning on doing, we'd end up a little ahead. So we were going to gear up, but then we looked at the cash that we actually had, and no, it didn't work. We bought too much last turn, but we needed to buy stuff. So we're counting on the Axis hitting us. So we pulled out. The Russians didn't put a bid in. Germany and Italy each put one in. They did their second level of pact, and the Italians triggered Turkey to make sure Germany wouldn't get Turkey. Germany agreed they would go for Hungary, and they shifted, well, announced they were going for Hungary as part of this, but that they're going to try and angle Poland into the Italian sphere because they can't do Poland themselves. But the way things are, it actually doesn't look that unlikely, and it would be very helpful to the Germans to have Hungary aligned with them. How happy is Italy about this? Not terribly, but they have a, you know, Turkey's a good position for them to move against, say, Greece or Bulgaria, or against southern Russia. So there's a lot of it, or down in the, against the Free French in Syria, which we could actually operate against. Or against the British if need be. There aren't a lot of French territories, you know, I mean, Syria is the only one that we could really access, and there's not much value to taking it. So making the move there doesn't make a lot of sense, except as a preemptive move in addition to the move against Russia. Remember, I'm not treating France as really a major power here, so knocking them out of there doesn't do much for me. And the U.S. did their gear up. They're just looking at the points, the Army, the Navy that they have available, and they're saying, can't do it yet. We gotta get some more production coming out, which is interesting. Of course, that's yet another sign that the Japanese may want to start moving against the U.S. because they have too many advantages. You know, the U.S. in the long run will be outproducing Japanese. So what can we do about it? And that's the question. What can you do about it? If nothing's changing in Europe here, not much. We just have to suffer, basically. We have to sit here, continue fighting the war in China, and realize the U.S. will be devastatingly powerful eventually. An attack right now, you know, it's not going to capture the United States. It's not going to knock them out of the war. That's essentially impossible, and should be. At least that's my assumption. So from the Japanese standpoint, it becomes, okay, well, what the hell am I attacking the U.S. for? I'm attacking them because they're about to attack me. Well, that's not going to happen yet. I'm going to wait until they move enough forward that I really need to make that move against them. Right now, I'm still producing oil. I've still got a chance of winning in China. And we'll see where we go from there. Maybe we take the war to the Commonwealth first and try to strike them first and hope the Americans, you know, take too long getting around to us that we can get that off. That's a hard move, though, especially since this is free. A whole hell of a lot happened here in Japan, in China. You can see the nationalists losing some ground again, but yeah, it's wonder why they didn't move. They moved this guy down, but I don't know why they didn't move that up. But anyway, doing their best to try to, you know, stem that Japanese tide, buy enough time for the U.S. to come in. And that's going to be a lot of time, actually. Over here, I think I finished moving the Russians, I'm not sure. But as we're entering into the March-April turn, the weather's actually pretty good everywhere except the Arctic zone. The Arctic zone is raining. It's not surprising. It's probably not going to get good there. But given that much of the fighting might happen in Romania, we may want to start the war now, see how far we can get, and cope with the fact that we're going to have some penalties here. Just, you know, the Russian army is just going to keep getting bigger. There's a lot of forces coming in there in May, June. So this might be the time to declare war. Unfortunately, we don't yet have our alliance with Italy up to level 3. Which means Italy, well, they can declare war too. But if we end up both getting in a line like that, and Italy may not have the money to declare war. They're kind of behind the lines there, so we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, we might well be starting it a little early and try to bring the Italians in, you know, to an alliance later in the war rather than right away. We have Italians, I forgot to organize these guys properly. We have Italians moving into Turkey. They're allowed to do that because they're close enough alignment that they can do so. And, well, you know, we'll move them where we can. We could rail them up, but that's not going to do me much good in terms of the headquarters. Then I'll need oil to recover that. I can get the oil there, so it's not a big deal. Oil doesn't require convoy points as a supply item, you know, when you're resupplying your units, which is good because otherwise you would have to position your oil with your units in little dumps everywhere. Certainly if the Italians move in there, that opens up an interesting opportunity for the Brits where they might want to go to war with Italy. The problem, of course, with that is in a year and 6 turns, the Germans can then go to war with the Brits. Of course they could anyway, you know. I mean, that's the whole thing. The fascists have sort of a free hand to do what they like. So a lot of these restrictions I kind of consider, what about Poland? You know, I want to make sure that I have Poland on my side and this, that, and the other. Yeah, I mean, they may not work out, but then again, they may. And I don't know. If we look at going to war with Russia, that probably makes Poland happy. No, actually that's a -1, which means it would go a +1. So, you know, we wouldn't even be building up any negative karma with Poland, which means that we could declare them in the war if nobody manages to rearrange them. Somebody could play with these points, I guess. So you can't really use the Italian points to move them off Italy, though. And there's not a lot of other points, so... Well, the diplomatic moves. Germany and Italy both got their triggers off near each other, so they went for the alliance instead, figuring something that takes both of them they should go for. And the US and Britain also furthered their alliances. Britain managed to trigger Spain, moving it directly into the US camp. That's going to be a potential problem if the Allies ever go after Germany, which I don't think they're going to do. It was kind of a waste of pips, but the pips are kind of running out in terms of, well, what's useful, what's not. You know, do I want to bring Norway in and make it a danger if Sweden's going to enter the war? Sweden's got a lot more troops and can very quickly overrun Norway, and then I'm not in a particularly good shape. Although it would distract the Swedes from the Russians. I'm a little worried about Russia. It can't really fall. It's too big unless, like I said, unless Japan comes streaming in or something. And even then, you know, it's like Japan can take these areas, but the Germans are going to have to make it deep into Russia. It's pretty damn hard to take all of Russia. And there's no way you force surrenders in this. There's no national will type situation in this game. It's just, you know, you grind them down all the way. How realistic is that? I don't know. You know, if you compare it to some of the other models like Unconditional Surrender or the Axis Empires model or the Advanced Third Reich model, they all have different ways of looking at it, and they're all speculative because, you know, Germany fought to the last ounce of blood, basically. Russia seems like they would have. Britain seems like they would have, but France sure the hell didn't. You know, at what point would these nations actually stop fighting? Italy didn't. Italy surrendered. It's hard to tell. Leaving it up to the players, how fair is that? How reasonable? Well, look, you know, if your side doesn't win, you place worse. So you kind of want to make sure that whichever side you're on in the war wins. What the sides are is hard to judge, but Russia sure the hell doesn't want to make an agreement with Germany to take out, you know, the democratic powers. They lose in that war because they don't have much to gain. Maybe a war in China or something. How would you get Japan to agree to that, you know? And there just aren't enough points. All the points are in Europe. Germany is going to win if they're allowed to get most of Europe this way. So you pretty much have that Russia-German clash. And then the question is, well, where do the Allies come in? Where do the Western Allies come in? Well, they're almost forced to come in some way against the Axis, just again for the same kind of reasons. If all of Russia falls to the Germans, their proportional victory is going to be too high, you know, whereas the Commonwealth just kind of ends up in a status quo situation. There isn't much they can do against Russia. If you're playing with a wild card game, what the hell does it, you know, you no longer really have sides in the same way. Although you could kind of fudge that, I guess, but the way the rules are written now, it doesn't work that way. So that means no war this turn. I was kind of looking forward to going in because there are a lot less Russians than there are going to be. There's a whole bunch. Well, this is actually next turn coming in here, so there's a whole bunch of Russians due in next turn, and you know, production this turn, I'll build a whole bunch more. This is what the Russians were counting on, was that they'd be able to fling up a pretty good defense. Well, if the war started early, it's not so clear. This area looks really weak. But it's not so clear anyway. I think Russia is going to take one hell of a hammer blow. Oh, bit of cute stuff happening. The Italians conquered Syria, coming in from here. Taking a little side trip. Hey, if we're not at war yet, what the hell? Plus, we'll be able, with level 3, to just march our army through the German territories. And then over here in China, the Japanese got themselves in some kind of trouble down here, and what it means is they're going to probably lose this resource. They kind of lucked out getting an extra impulse, so there's a chance that they can straighten out. Their real problem is the Chinese have fighters, and the Japanese really don't. They have like one. They're going to have to get some fighters onto the field there to help to help gain some sort of air superiority, because all their bombers are just useless. They're like afraid to use them without some air cover. They sent the one fighter in. It did okay against one of the Flying Tigers units, but that's it. It did okay, and there are 3 more Chinese fighters out there. Granted, these guys are a little weaker, but they're not bad, and they could actually support an offensive. The Chinese line has kind of weakened so that they could stretch their way up, but again, they can produce more. They've got more on the way. They actually got blitzkrieged and had a couple of units go in there because they had nowhere to retreat to. So they're guaranteed to get some of those units back, whereas the Japanese actually lost a division, a whole division, in their attack. I really ought to eat up this supply here. This is kind of risky, leaving it kicking around there. There's no real reason for that. But anyway, that's what we got. And now we go to production, and next turn, we're expecting the war to start. And a big here in May, June. Germany only spent $1. Now I rolled dice for this rather than just make the decision. I knew they wanted to take a shot, but they figured they probably had second chance, or a fairly good chance in this 3rd position. They should have spent more. That would have put them above Russia at least. Instead, what happened is Italy declared war on Russia. Russia banked for their next turn, because they're going to want to bring a country in. And Italy declaring war increases Russia's effectiveness. It doesn't do anything for their production multiple. They don't have any effect from Italy. But what it ends up meaning is that, well, Russia's at war with Italy, but they can't do anything about it, really. The Italians can next turn do an MPO 5 if they get the jump, but the Russians probably have the advantage there, and only one player can do no. Yeah, only one player can do this each turn, so it could be a bidding war, but Italy's so broke at negative 13 that they really can't afford to. So they're not going to be able to bring in their big ally, Turkey. The question is, will Germany get to declare war next turn? They're not allowed to this turn. Although, they can. Using the declaration of war, you're allowed to declare war during any impulse. DoD 3 allows you to do that as kind of a trumping ability. So I can still do the declaration of war, even though I didn't plan for it and spend for it, and it'll have its effects then. And that's kind of a bonus in a sense, because it means that the Germans won't have to pay, they won't be giving up an activation chance. Of course, next turn they have to actually make the action happen. So they're going to have to keep bidding until they can get that action off. But they'll have some bonus towards that. And then next turn also, maybe, well, we'll probably see Bulgaria come into the war next turn. Anyhow, major effects from that Italian declaration that caused some kind of spillage here and there diplomatically. Somewhat, in some cases it's somewhat not expected. So like Portugal is really gung-ho to enter the war. The problem is they can't do a hell of a lot. They don't have much of an army. If they do enter the war, they're basically asking to be invaded. So I don't really want to bring them in. Other countries like Argentina, well, how much advantage is there for that? There might be some, their navies might be able to help try to protect this and might be able to kind of defend against the possibility of an intervention there. What I'm going to do with the minor power joins in is I'm going to charge a country each time it wants to do it, but that it can do it to multiple countries at once. That brings it more in alignment with how World in Flames actually allows those to be triggered, one per impulse. And then it has a big effect from the treaty chart, so you might want to be careful which countries you bring in. Look at the chart, see, hey, am I going to lose an ally by bringing an ally in? But given that this is really kind of a general war, I don't see why the allies can't kind of tumble in pretty quickly in the one per impulse type setup. I've started using bigger counters for the oil. I should have done this earlier because Russia and the US should have humongous stockpiles of oil, much larger than they actually have. This is especially important for Russia, but it's actually important for both of them because they're both kind of using their oil in production now. They still get some, but when you're talking about moving, something like the Japanese Navy, which is spread all over the place, it's actually all in Tokyo, but when you're talking about moving something that size, you're talking about a fairly significant amount of oil that gets burned each turn that you actually use it. So Japan can't actually fight a very long war or much of a war with their Navy. The US can, but the oil limitation really prevents you from doing ridiculously large fleet maneuvers. You may not send as many ships out as you could. You may send out smaller task forces just because, hey, I want to save some oil here. And it adds an interesting layer to it. I'm still going to have this, oh God, what do I do? Anyway, get the reinforcements to place, and then tomorrow morning I guess we'll start with the war. And I think the Germans are going to declare war as well. I mean, they're set for it. They should be doing it. They should have done it last turn, actually, during the impulses. I didn't think about that. Well, it's the start of a bloody, bloody turn. And you know what? I should have loaded this video up before this turn. So what I'm going to do is come back. This should have been loaded last night.